Greetings, friends. Operational situation by the end of the 13th of May. We are continuing active hostilities in the border areas of the Kharkiv region. The activity of the enemy is quite high. On the part of the APU, counterattacks are also being undertaken now. We will talk about this in more detail. Well, let's also talk in more detail about the Pokrovsky and Kurakovsky directions, where the assault operations in Krasnogorskavka and not Tailova are also continuing. The border of the Kharkiv region in the direction of the settlement of Lipsy, the enemy managed to advance and gain a foothold in the settlement of Gluboko. Footage was published with a flag in the center of the settlement. That is, the enemy demonstrated its presence in the settlement by geolinking. It's just the same at the intersection in the center. And with you, we have added the advance of Russian troops in a section up to 438 kilometers wide, to a depth of 2 and 4 kilometers. In total, the enemy managed to take control of 12, as many as 14/100ths of a square kilometer. The situation looks like this, and naturally further assault actions are continuing from the enemy attacking in the south and southwest direction. In the settlement of Gluboko itself, active fighting continues. There are also attempts by the Stavka to advance near the reservoir, but this is all of a positional nature. The main points we have, of course, are what we talked about on the previous broadcast, and Lukiansk. So, in addition to Gluboko, he also managed to gain a foothold in a small landing and building between the settlements of Gluboko-Lukiansk and continue assault operations in the settlement of Lukiansk. So far, no new visual data has been received for Lukiansk, including messages, as in the case of the settlement of Zelin. However, naturally, the enemy took a deep one. Now the main focus will shift, well, after the rest of the southern part, yes, the main focus will shift to Lukiansk. The main attacks. After receiving Lukianets, of course, he will get positions for a wide coverage of attacks in the direction of the settlement of Lipetsk and will increase pressure. At the same time, there will also be attacks in the area of the green, distracting character, because there were attempts from the settlement of Wednesday in the direction of the settlement of Ternova. But they did not have a positional character, it was a distracting character just the same. So far, without any changes, but this suggests that the enemy has plenty of those very small assault groups. And the activity of the Drug remains generally very, very high in the direction. We proceed further to the Volchansk direction. Let's start with an official message from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In the Kharkiv direction, the defense forces pushed back the Rashists and are conducting sweeps on the northern outskirts of Volchansk. Previously, it was reported that they are on the outskirts, and now there is information that they were completely knocked out of these suburbs. We expect visual information, of course, and what will happen in the context of the next 48 hours. At the same time, there is also a statement that the number of military clashes has increased, and clashes have begun in the area of the village of Staritsa. Now let's visually, and in more detail. Not only Staritsa, not only Volchansk, there is also Bugruatka, which we talked about on previous broadcasts. Today, shots were published by our fighters. The enemy is already present in the northern part of the village of Bukrovatka. Well, it is openly standing on the road, so the information on Bukrovatka is being clarified. The message on the old man, yes, the enemy is moving, it means moving along the tract, well, in two directions, in principle. They work here. Let's go through the changes right away. The enemy managed to advance in a section up to 157 kilometers wide to a depth of 238 kilometers, and was able to clear the forest area west of Ogurtsav. The situation looks like this. Naturally, there are active hostilities, or rather, the active hostilities of Bugruvatka and Staritsa continue. As for Volchansk, the situation is with varying success. I would call it that way so far at this segment, because the enemy is making a lot of attempts to advance, but also on the part of the AFU. The defense forces are taking a number of measures to stabilize, including heavy armored vehicles are working, so there are battles. There are fights going on. Therefore, previous messages were also from the enemy, yesterday and today, that they managed to enter the settlement of Volchansk. This is not true. The main military operations, namely the main ones, are now taking place in the area of the settlement of Gitish, where Russian troops are pressing into directions, but so far they have not succeeded. In any case, let's say, they have not been able to advance further and gain a foothold at 1800. Then it's along the road section to Volchansk itself. But at the same time, there is also a neighboring forest area, a small landing, on which they also pressed. But we have no information by the end of the day on the situation in this area. Therefore, there are still a number of points that are being clarified. That's why I say that the dynamic situation persists. Moving on. Along the Kupiansko-Limansky section, activity was in the area of Torsky, Vostoknotorsky. The Russian troops attempted to break through to Torsky with an assault armored group. Before, as you remember, let's go with the background, they carried out assault actions in the direction of Turnov. Because we have not really talked about the last 3 weeks for this section, the section minimally, as you remember, we managed to stop and even counterattack, push back the Russian troops, that is, the AFU conducted a couple of successful counterattacks, then activity decreased, activity in the Chasky direction from the Russian side increased more. And at the same time the APU conducted a counterattack south of the Near Yar and the Far Yar. And we managed to regain control of a small part of the forest belt, but still. Then the enemy made attempts to advance to the Ivanovka beam. We managed to repel the attacks, although we added gray zones and small areas. And we have said that they are accumulating forces, they have a reserve. And they are transferring armored vehicles to the Serebryansky forest, that is, everything that we have to the west of Krymenaya, in order to carry out assault operations. Therefore, they will definitely try. Well, they tried in the amount of 10 armored vehicles, and the footage was published. You can go to my Telegram to watch the full video. The soldiers of the 63rd, 60th, 45th Brigade managed to destroy 5 tanks and 5 armored vehicles. You can watch the full video. We made a number of mistakes, just fatal. The Russian command, not the Russian troops, it was the Russian command, perhaps. Perhaps they considered that the forces from the Limansky direction were transferred to Kharkov. Perhaps, just the same, our counterintelligence has worked out in order to slip a little bit of the wrong data, so to speak. Therefore, they decided on such a large-scale attack, but the guys managed to completely repel it, so we do not fix any changes. 10 armored vehicles in about 20 minutes. This is very, very much. Although it seemed that even from our side, representatives were already officially saying that the Russian command was working smoothly, but no. They were making a number of mistakes. It is clear that they work much better than before. It is clear that this is a very high level, plus they have a number of advantages over us, so they make fewer mistakes. But they still make what they were preparing just in order to break through to the thorns. They decided to shift the blow to the torso, well, and spent this small one, but nevertheless, there is a reserve. Because, as you remember, they are now using the main forces in other areas, and the main blow will be made in 2 of the 3 directions. These are Chaz Yar, Pokrovskaya, Kurakovskaya. Well, they converge to Kurakovsky and Pokrovsky, although the hour is too long. Everything will depend on the situation on the battlefield, which will develop as a result of their Kharkov operation. As far as it will be successful for them, as far as they will be able to create problems for us. Because again in the official information field, so the situation on this site remains unchanged. So, there were reports in the official information field that our forces were being transferred, that is, what the enemy basically wanted. It is clear that these are not our last reserves, but still combat-ready brigades are exactly what they stop. In other words, the enemy partially achieved what he wanted. Activity on another sector of the front, of course, the amount of ammunition that we are receiving now, of course, is beginning to be spent on other sectors as well. I mean Kharkiv, 2 directions, Lipsy, and therefore, the attacks continue. Moving on. We have no significant changes in the Chasky direction, including in the Ivanovsky area. Although the situation there is very difficult now as a whole, very difficult, and unambiguously the enemy will take the main blow. On the southern flank in the near future, of course it is too close the ledge formed, that is, to take control of Ivanovskaya. And then the advance through the Ivanovo forest. Of course, there is a very serious line ahead, a defensive line, a line of defense. There are a lot of obstacles, but the enemy is just now hoping that due to the wide coverage and work of small assault groups, he will be able to find a gap, wedge himself in, well, and further develop success. In any case, it's too early to talk about anything yet. The main pour is the southern flank. The situation, I think, in the next 3 or 4 days will already be clearer for us in the Chassiar direction. Although I am more inclined to the fact that the main focus will be on the Kurakovskaya and Pokrov direction. According to Pokrovsky, I will comment on not Tailov. So, after the enemy has occupied a number of positions, the main fighting is already behind the school, behind the hospital. Of course, in the northern direction, we have, in principle, a collective farm, an embankment. A collective farm, or as it is correctly called, a collective farm in Russian, in front of the street. It doesn't matter. In general, the enemy is coming close to the road. Most likely, well, considering what it was. What was the advance? What was the vector of attacks? What force was involved on the part of the enemy? Most likely he will soon be able to establish control over this part, up to the road, and will begin to press. No, not in the western direction immediately, but in the south. In Yuzhny, there is still one of the streets, also with buildings, well, and the enemy will try to take control of it. Because there are a number of attacks to date based on drone footage, which are aimed just at moving south. Also in the direction of the Domak beam, but no longer south of Pervomaysky, and it's not Tylova to the south. Therefore, it will close the formed ledge, and it needs to get a more stable flanking position, which, in principle, it is aimed at now. Naturally, the advance south of Not Tailov, to the Domaka beam, it gives him the opportunity to reach a number of logistics routes that lead us to positions south of Pervomayskaya, to Novelsky, 2 positions between Pervomaysky, Novelsky, and Domaka beams. Naturally, this is also, so to speak, a very important area for the enemy, so he is aiming at it, he is already aiming at it. There are attempts, so far they are of a positional nature, but still there is a goal. And we turn to the last Krasnogorovka, where there are active hostilities. Again, there is a lot of different information, disinformation about Krasnogorskavka itself. As for the positions south of the southeast, southwest, or rather, from the Krasnogorsk refractory plant, we do not record any visual changes. The main focus now is on the Russian side, as we said before, on the construction north of the plant, the main building, yes. Its capture will allow the enemy to have. They already actually have all the necessary advanced positions for a more serious assault. Well, naturally, if we take the basis of its superiority, that is, tactical aviation and air bomb strikes, then, of course, air bombs are more serious destruction, more serious damage will be inflicted just in the private sector, and not in multi-story buildings. Less damage, of course, so the enemy is now targeted. That is, when he advanced, what we said on the daytime broadcast, and took control of the school. The vector shifted a little, so far a little to the street in Sadovaya, at the intersection with Kirov Street, that is. It is pressing in this direction. Well, attempts have already been made along Kirov Street itself, in a northeasterly direction, David. That is, approximately to this area. And the second vector, and so it continues from Donetsk and Staromykhailovka to the eastern part of Krasnogorovka. The situation also remains very, I would say, complicated, because in fact by the end of today, we are stating that the enemy is moving along Zapadnaya Street, the first vector. It seems unlikely to me that he will put pressure on the Solnikny microdistrict. Will try to bypass the capture of the hospital, the main goal. It's easier here, you can work with less effort, so I think it will go to the hospital. Taking into account the fact that it also pushes from the Geologichnaya Street to the north, well, we have central streets to the north as well. This is the same school, what was captured, and further attempts. Everything that we have there is located west of the Solnikny microdistrict. So there is an enemy's western advance along the street somewhere. It has a distracting nature of action, probing the defense. Probing now everything that happens in the locality, and accordingly pulls up additional forces. This is the most important thing. Now they have begun to pull up and prepare, as we said, for the final assault. It will be from at least two directions. One of the directions is just the same, it can be a residential district, Sunny. But everyone is talking about when they will be able to capture it, when they will be able to capture the hospital. That is, to get positions in this area. And of course the residential district is Sunny. And after the capture, we can state that the enemy will attack with large forces on the rest of Krasnogorovka. We still have a difficult situation on this segment of the front,